Greetings. This is Pastor Velcro, and I've got another lesson for you on the survey of the Bible. I've been meaning to do these every Tuesday, but last week kind of got away from me. So we'll try and get back to it. This week we're covering the Pentateuch. 5 books, 1 week. Half an hour, more or less. That's a lot of chapters, by the way. We're gonna have some fun with it. Just for fun, I have over here in the books of the Bible, how many chapters are there in these 5 books? Well, there's 90, 117, 153, 187 chapters in these 5 books. And I've got the total number of verses here. It's a big count. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of material in these 5 books. So how am I going to cover it in roughly half an hour, 40 minutes? Overview. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what the Bible's about. And the important thing to remember is the Bible is one book. We divide it up into individual books. And there are a lot of different authors, as I talked about in the last episode. But the Bible as a whole has one continuous message. And that message starts in the Pentateuch. So the quiz for this week, and you can pause the video and do the quiz yourself, but what does the word Pentateuch mean? Who wrote the Pentateuch? When was it written? Can you even name the 5 books of the Pentateuch? And here's a good one for you. Who was renamed Israel? The man for whom the nation was named. How about this? Place the following 5 events in order of when they occurred. Tower of Babel, creation, Exodus from Egypt, Abraham, and the Great Flood. All right, so the first 5 books of the Bible, as Protestants call it, are considered the most holy books by the Jews. The Jews call them the Torah, which is Hebrew for teaching. The Greek word most frequently used to refer to these books is Pentateuch, which means 5 scrolls. This is an adaptation of the Hebrew name or nickname for the Torah of 5/5 of the law. The entire law, one entity, 5 books, 5/5 of the law. The Pentateuch is so vital. It's the foundation of Judaism, as well as Christianity and other religions such as Islam and the Samaritan religion. And yes, there is still a nation called Samaria. And they speak Aramaic, and they follow the Torah. A little different from the Jews, a lot different from the Muslims, and a lot different from Christians. Maybe more like the Jews, and then the Christians, and then the Muslims out there. The Pentateuch was originally written, we guess, around 1450 years before Christ. I'll bet you thought it was a lot further back than that. I know I used to think that. 1450 BC is roughly 425 years after Abraham was called by God. To put that all in perspective, how about the ancient Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written 200 BC? Some more than that. but 1,200 years later. And so these books of the Pentateuch, they've been around a long time. Not as long as some of us think, but a long time. 3,500 years roughly for us. They do not indicate who wrote them, but tradition tells us that Moses wrote them after the Exodus from Egypt. And that's clearly shown in these books as you read them, that Moses was writing what was occurring and that this happened after Egypt as they're going through the wilderness or near the end of the wilderness. Although the last few words describe Moses' death, probably written by Joshua, his successor. So the Hebrew names of the Torah, the Pentateuch, are taken directly from the first verse of each book. The English names are taken from the Greek, the Septuagint, done by Jews as they translated it into Greek. And the Greeks reflect the theme of each book, while the Hebrew reflects the first words, or first word actually. So Genesis has 50 chapters. The English name means creation, and in the Greek word. The Hebrew name is, and believe me, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but Bereshit. It means in the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The book of Exodus is 40 chapters, and in the Greek and English, it means Exodus. The Hebrew name is Shemot, and it means names. And you will find a lot of lists of names in this book, plus the story of the Exodus. Leviticus is 27 chapters. It is the Levitical law. That means from the tribe of Levi, who became the priests, and including the high priest from the family of Aaron. The Hebrew name is Vayikra, and it means he called. So, called out of the wilderness. Numbers is 36 chapters. English and Greek meaning, it just means numbering. Hebrew name is Bamdebar. It means in the wilderness, and it tells a story about the Israelites in the wilderness, wandering through the wilderness. Deuteronomy is 34 chapters. English and Greek meaning is the second law. Deutero is second. Deuteronomy. Hebrew name is Devarim, and it means things. Things that happen? Yeah, something like that. Read Deuteronomy 1:1. The following timeline is a rough estimate. Different dates are given by different scholars, but they're generally close to the following, and I found this rather interesting. So what happened? Creation? No, we don't really know when, but most scholars are going to say Adam was somewhere around 4,000, maybe 6,000 BC. 6,000 is probably closer to the most commonly accepted. Noah was roughly 2,000, 2,500, maybe 3,000 years later. Opinions vary, but call it 3,000 years. And then Abraham, about 2,000 years BC, and Moses about 1,550 years BC. And I'm not going to argue with anybody that disputes those dates, but that's pretty close to the most commonly accepted. All right, now let's get into the 5 books. Now that we've looked at all the background, well, a little bit of the background, let's get into the 5 books, and we're just going to give a little bit of those. I've got, two paragraphs on Genesis. That's it. How do you summarize it? You should try it sometime. Genesis begins with the story of creation, continues with the story of Adam and Eve. Are you listening to the sequence? Remember that question number 6 in the quiz? Begins with the story of creation and continues with the story of Adam and Eve's descendants. Significant time is spent on the story of Noah, the great flood. Following this is the account regarding the Tower of Babel. And the story of Abraham's life and his covenant with God are a major, major portion of the book of Genesis. His son Isaac and his grandson Jacob, who was named or renamed Israel. Their stories are also recorded. It is Jacob's sons, Israel's sons, for whom the 12 tribes of Israel are named. 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob. Genesis also gives us the story of Abraham's great-grandson, Joseph. It is at this time that Abraham's descendants multiplied greatly in Egypt after Joseph brought his father and family down during a great famine. In Egyptian history, they are called Habiru. Is that where we get the name Hebrew? At least that's according to some scholars, but it's disputed by others. Makes sense to me. Genesis reveals information regarding God and his relationship with mankind and his purpose for his creation. In Genesis, society was based on patriarchal rule. Father. Patriarch is from the Latin for father. So the father and or grandfather or great grandfather or whatever, that was who kind of set the rules for each unit of people. During the next 4 books, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we see God's people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, becoming a theocratic society. That means a God-ruled society. It's based on their religion, and it's led by God and his chosen leaders. At first, well, we'll get into all of that, but at first, Moses, and then Joshua, and then the judges, and then the kings. Yeah, God didn't plan the king part, no. So after 400, I'm way ahead of myself. After 400 years in Egypt, the Israelites were led out of Egypt by Moses. They had become slaves of the Egyptians during those 400 years, and they multiplied greatly, even though they were poorly treated. And this story of their exodus from Egypt is recorded in the other 4 books of the Pentateuch. They describe the Israelites leaving Egypt and traveling over a 40-year period before entering the Promised Land. The second book, named Exodus, it shows the tribes of Israel forming into a nation, which is based upon their religious identity, as I said. It is through Moses that God reveals his law, his desires for the Israelites. And what we're seeing here is a continuation. God provided for Adam and Eve in the garden. Adam and Eve sinned. God tried to provide redemption. Mankind kept getting worse and worse. And God said, I'm going to wipe out mankind, but I'm going to save Noah. And he wiped out mankind with a flood, saved 8 people, Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives. And God then he went to Abram and said, godly man, respects me, obeys me. I'm going to make him the father of a great nation, and through him I will provide a savior for all mankind. God is throughout the whole Bible trying to find a way to reach out to mankind and provide salvation. So the third book of the Pentateuch is where God starts to lay down the law in a more detailed form than he did in Exodus. It's a lot of information about the priests and the tabernacle, the ceremonial and moral laws for the people. Don't just skip over it. There's a lot you can learn there. Try and understand what God was trying to teach people. Remember, in the Old Testament, God gave us physical laws. When we get to the New Testament and the Gospels, we're going to see Jesus say, you have heard it said, meaning Mosaic law, but I'm saying apply it in a spiritual manner this way. So the fourth book of the Pentateuch is called Numbers because it contains a full count of the Israelites by tribe and family. And It shows their political, social, family groupings. It contains many laws interspersed throughout the book. It also describes why the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and recounts part of their journey. If you think you already know that, you might want to go read it again and see if there's something more you can learn there. Because trust me, there probably is. Deuteronomy is the last book of the Pentateuch. It's mostly composed of some speeches by Moses and further instructions from regarding God's law. And it finishes with Joshua being named as Moses' successor. And if you read the last 4 books of the Pentateuch, you can see as Joshua becomes more and more significant. Okay, so the 12 tribes of Israel. Reuben was the oldest, and I'm not going to go just by oldest, but I'm just going to name some of them off and not speak about most of them. But there's Reuben, Dan, Issachar, Simeon, Naphtali, Zebulun, Levi, and as I mentioned before, it's through his tribe that the priest and temple workers came, as well as the high priest from the family of Aaron from the tribe of Levi. Then there's Gad, Asher, Judah. Judah became the tribe known as the king provider or something like that, mostly because of King David and King Solomon, but tribe of Judah was pretty significant. Tribe of Benjamin, the last-born son of Jacob, and then Joseph. Now, normally when we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, Joseph isn't even named. Instead, we name Ephraim and Manasseh. But wait, that gives us 13. Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's 2 sons, born when he was in Egypt by his Egyptian wife. The Hebrews were intermarried already? Yeah. Probably a lot of the Israelites were while they were in Egypt. But when we see the 12 tribes, when they divide land in the promised land, not in this study, but in another, you're going to see that Joseph doesn't get any land. Ephraim gets some and Manasseh gets some, but that's 13. No, it isn't. There's 12 because the Levites didn't get any land. They got cities within each property of each tribe. They're called the half-tribes of Ephraim and half-tribe of Manasseh, and because they make up the tribe of Joseph. And all of that you got to think about if you want to understand it. So in order to understand the Bible, you need to understand the people, the culture. So I want to give you a little bit of cultural stuff. During the days of the Pentateuch, I already mentioned the term father was used as a sign of great respect because they ruled the family. But it was not always meant as the biological father. If somebody in the tribe owned slaves that were Gentiles, they would call the leader of the tribe father as well. It was a term of great respect. Sort of like today in biker terms, people might say Mr. Harley was the father of motorcycles. Harley Davidson. Or Mr. Ford was the father of the automobile. They weren't necessarily the first two, but they're the ones that brought it into fame. So they get a lot of respect. Speaking of respect, when the Bible says, in the Old Testament, especially early part of the Old Testament, when the Bible says that somebody bowed, it's not like we typically think of. Rather, they would drop to their knees and then gradually, not always, not all, everyone, everywhere, but oftentimes, they would drop to their knees and then gradually lean forward until they were literally lying on the ground. And, oh yeah, there are a lot of cultures in the Middle East that still do this today. And some other places. Bargaining was done a little differently in those days. You can read about this. A great example, my favorite, is in Genesis 33 when Abraham's bartering for some land where he can bury his wife. And he approaches the Hittites and he says, I'm interested in this land. And the Hittites said, oh, Father Abraham, we respect you so much. You may have it for free, knowing that he never would accept that. And if he did, he would give a gift even greater in return. So they kind of negotiated from a point of, I'm going to try and give you more than you give me. Interesting, very un-American. But there's a lot of joy in that, and I have tried to practice this a great deal in my life, and there is joy in it. Another thing to understand, as you read through the book of Genesis, especially, you see that wells become a point of contention more than once. Well, wells were relatively limited in those days, so they were of unlimited value, especially to someone who's trying to graze herds. If land is unoccupied and a man digs a well, it is the same as claiming ownership. So when you see them disputing about wells, that's what's going on. And to damage a well, it was like a declaration of war. So when you read about the wells like in Genesis 26, remember the importance of these wells.
Shut up. Shut up.
So the Bible has many references to a man kissing another man, and that one kind of freaks some people out. This was a sign of great respect, and while it may be uncomfortable to many Americans of today, many cultures in the world today, it's still a practice. In fact, in the biker world, I greet many of my friends with a kiss on the cheek. Yeah, there's a few old school guys that still kiss on the lips. It's not a sexual thing. It's just a friendship thing. And they aren't the only ones. Many people do that. And not just bikers and not just people from the Middle East. I've already mentioned a couple times new names, like Jacob was given a new name of Israel. New names were often given to indicate something of significance. Much as many people are given nicknames today, such as, in the South, a lot of guys are called Bubba. And in the West, you got a lot of colorful nicknames in the cowboy world, like Lefty and Slim and Curly, and usually he's bald, and Tiny, who's usually big, and so on and so forth. And in the American Indian culture, you have children are given one name, and then when they become an adult, especially the warriors, are often given a new name that indicates something of significance about what they have done. And even once somebody's an adult, in some cultures, they can get a new name. Perhaps somebody might be given a name as an adult, like Velcro. So, this was not unusual. Bread. All right. This is a word that had a very special meaning to people in the Middle East in ancient days. In fact, it's carried down into our culture today. Bread was such a very important staple in their life because a lot of foods didn't last very long, and frankly, in the desert heat, neither did bread, but it was easy to make. Take a little grain, grind it on a stone, bake some bread, and you got food, and you can make it every day. So bread became very important. Many times people didn't eat anything else for periods of time. Of course, they loved to eat grains and vegetables and fruit and cows and sheep and goat. But bread was such a staple that the term bread came to mean any food. So when Jesus says to the disciples in John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman at the well, Jesus says, I have food to eat you know not of. He was literally saying, I have bread that you don't know of. Even today, we, not everyone, but Christians and some others say, hey, let's go break some bread. It means let's go to a restaurant and eat or go somewhere and eat. And I'm just giving you this to help you understand when you're reading the Bible, you need to understand the culture to understand what some of these words mean as you're reading it. Measurements. Measurements are a pet peeve of mine. Many of the translations don't translate the measurements, which is disgusting to me. For instance, a cubit. Depending on your translation, you may have cubits in there. What's a cubit? Well, it's the distance of a man's arm from elbow to the end of his middle finger. Now, in a man 6 foot tall, that's typically about 18 inches. But in King David's time, it might have been more like about 15 inches or 14. In Jesus' time, about the same. In King James' time, probably about the same. The height of men have varied throughout the centuries. And from culture to culture. So cubit, yeah, exactly how do we translate it? That's why they take the easy way out. Now the truth is, if we're talking about Goliath, his 6 cubits in a span, if the average man is 5'8", or the average man is 6 foot, it really doesn't matter because you take those comparisons and then you adjust the height of Goliath to David, and you get the whole idea that Goliath is close to double his size, no matter which cubit you use. 5'8", 6 foot, 5'4", 5'10". A span for a 6 foot man, it goes from the thumb to the little finger when they're stretched out end to end. It's about 9 inches for the average man, and don't check some of these NBA basketball players. Some of those guys, they got spans that are a couple of inches longer than average. Oh, wait, that's why they call it a hand span. Oh, that measurement came down through history. Some of these words first came into our language through the Bible when it was translated into English, which would be King James' time in 100 to 200 years before that. Not necessarily from the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. That's an interesting study all by itself. How much land is an acre? It's the amount of land a team of oxen can plow in one day. Huh. Yeah. Boy, we sure glad we have tractors now. How about a fathom? That's the length of a man's arms outstretched from fingertip to fingertip, which on a 6 foot man is typically about 6 feet. And again, adjusted for the cultural differences, you can find the average height of mankind throughout the centuries if you go digging. So to the quiz, what does Pentateuch mean? It means 5 scrolls. Who wrote the Pentateuch? Moses. When it was written? 1450 BC, maybe a little before. List the books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Who was renamed Israel? Jacob. Place the following in sequential order: the creation, the great flood or Noah's flood, which I didn't call it there because I didn't want to give it away too much. Tower of Babel. Why did I throw it in there? I don't know. It's just an interesting point, but it came after the flood and before Abraham. Huh. Exodus from Egypt came after Abraham. So your homework for next week's lesson, I'm not looking for short answers here. I want you to write out your thoughts. This is how you will learn the most. And these questions, I've chosen them fairly carefully. Do 1, 2, 3, all of them. It shouldn't be difficult. For next Tuesday, before I start next Tuesday, we're going to do the 12 books of history in 1 week, in one lesson. But some of these questions are from today's lesson, some are from next week's. So the book of Genesis does not explain where God came from or how God came to exist. Why could this be significant when discussing God with others? You tell me. If you want my opinion, you have to tell me yours first. Email me, call me, whatever. Number 2, if you had to give one and only one lesson for us to learn from the Pentateuch, what would that lesson be? And why did you choose that one? One lesson from the Pentateuch, you only get half an hour. You're going to explain something that you consider very important from the Pentateuch. What would it be? And why? Number 3, the books of history are obviously a historical record of the early days of the Kingdom of Israel. Discuss other reasons than get history of why we should study these books. And I can name a few reasons why we can study these books, what we can learn from them. Question number 4, why was God so adamant that the Israelites not intermarry with the inhabitants of the Promised Land? And how does that apply to us today? I know what some people teach, but what does the Bible say? Interesting question. Again, I know what I think. If you want to know what I think, you have to tell me what you think. And I'm available. And the last question. This one is for my wife. She loves this. I created a series of riddles for young people many years ago. They loved trying to solve the riddles. And this one, I'm not going to give you the whole riddle. Maybe I will next week. I don't know. But there are 4 women that have 2 things in common. And I want you to tell me what those 2 things are. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. What do those 4 women have in common? 2 things. And you are going to have to think. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. And that's the end of this lesson. I hope that you're enjoying it. I hope it is beneficial to you. I hope it brings you a better understanding of the Bible, makes it come alive to you a little more. That you understand these are real people living real lives, and it's not just some dry and boring thing that we read in a monotone just to get over. You know? And Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, and he took them to the mount where they... No. Come on. This is God's holy word. Read it with emotion and understanding. As Jesus said, let him who has ears hear. Let him who has eyes see. And he wasn't talking about physical sight and physical hearing. He was talking about understanding. Do you know what I mean? Love you. Take care of yourself. Hope to see you next week, if I can keep my life together for a while. Bye.